exacerbated the violent institutional and societal racism that regards Black and Brown people as less worthy, less valuable, and less human. The systemic racism and inequities are the same powers that have shaped and sustained environmental injustice. That is, systemic and societal racism lie at the root of the environmental health and climate crisis, and it's impossible to achieve environmental justice without racial justice. Those pillars of systemic racism are threaded throughout institutions, including environmental regulatory entities. We can look at the practice of redlining and restrictive covenants that relegated Black people and immigrants to neighborhoods deemed undesirable, areas targeted for hazardous operations that have been subjected to a long history of divestment, the documented history of the placement of landfills, slaughterhouses, oil drilling, and refineries in communities of color. And these dangerous polluting operations and systems have been normalized. They are rationalized as necessary and unavoidable, and even as beneficial. And that type of logic has been facilitated because the risks and impacts on the health, safety, and even life expectancy are placed primarily on communities of color, both at the front and back end of their life cycles. It's been generally deemed that families will breathe dirty air, they won't have clean water, cause respiratory disease and premature death. We tolerate as a society that farm workers are exposed to the chemicals, that families go without clean water, or communities have industrial sites to their beaches. And schools are next for 20 oil drilling and their homes, which is backed by research and science, only to be readily dismissed by some as it being simply infeasible. There are cost-benefit analyses happening daily in people's minds and as a technical matter that disregard the value of these families' lives and of their rights to live and grow in a healthy environment. There are constant decisions and actions happening, direct, inadvertent, conscious, and unconscious, that create conditions that determine whose health is jeopardized and made vulnerable to disease and climate impacts, and which families are freed from those health burdens, which communities benefit from investments and opportunities, and how we work together to ensure the prosperity of all communities. Yet this is an extraordinary time brimming with transformative potential. You and your colleagues have formidable challenges and also real opportunities to continue to move us toward a shared vision of healthy, sustainable, and prosperous communities and a sound future. And it is in that spirit that we offer this space for us to learn together, to chart a course to improve agency culture and actions, to create environmentally prosperous conditions in our most vulnerable communities. So we hope you enjoyed this briefing and look forward to continuing to work together.
Thank you so much, Gladys. With that, Nina, next slide, please. I'd like to review the agenda. So we just dropped the agenda in the chat box, and we also emailed this to you in case you'd like to use it to follow along today. So Gladys just provided the welcome and CEJA overview. Next, we'll ask everyone to please introduce yourselves in the chat box. After that, Katie will provide an overview of this year's agency assessment to help you develop a deeper understanding of our 8 EJ principles. At that point, you'll get to pick which EJ principle you're interested in learning more about. From 120 to 140, we'll get to hear agency case studies from CEJA's member and partner organizations. They'll provide examples of how we apply our EJ principles and ways state agencies can improve their performance. Afterwards, we'll have some Q&A in the chat box and take a quick group picture. Then we'll take a 10-minute stretch break. We'll then return at 2 p.m. and you'll be divided into interactive breakout rooms with 10 to 15 other participants. For the next half hour, CEJA staff will facilitate a discussion to help you all share and learn from one another about how state agencies can improve and implement your EJ principles. Before we reconvene, each breakout group facilitator will ask for one agency staff person per group to volunteer to share key takeaways to the larger group. We'll adjourn at 3 p.m., at which point we'll email you all a copy of this year's final EJ Agency Assessment Report. If at any point you have questions, feel free to message Tiffany, the help desk. Next slide, please. So now I invite everyone to please introduce yourselves. Using the chat box at the bottom of your screen, type in your name and your organization or agency. And as an additional option, we would love to hear why you're here and what you hope to get out of today's briefing. Great to see you, Justin Fong, advisor to CPUC Commissioner. Valdicini, awesome. So wonderful to see so many of you who we've really been in communication with throughout this whole past year that we've been producing this report. I see lots of folks from different agencies. Thea Rittenhouse with CDFA, great to see you. We've got staff from all over California and EJ advocates from throughout California as well. Awesome. Well, while these are chatting in, I'd just like to really celebrate the fact that we have 114 folks participating in today's discussion out of 150 people registered from dozens of agencies and organizations from across California. So it's so wonderful to virtually see all of you. Thank you for joining us. With that, next slide, please, and I'll pass the microphone to Katie Valenzuela, CEJA's Political and Policy Director. Thank you.
Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining us. My name is Katie Valenzuela. I am based here in Sacramento, and I'm proud to be CEJA's Policy and Political Director to take on this next section of our presentation. Environmental justice is about addressing deep inequities that have led to communities of color and low-income communities experiencing high pollution exposure as well as poorer health outcomes. I like to talk about environmental justice in terms of process and in terms of outcomes. It's about process, ensuring that communities are leading in identifying solutions and pursuing those better outcomes, but also in terms of those outcomes and actually reducing disparities as our work continues. So if you go to the next slide, please, Nina, I would like to go through each of our environmental justice principles, because it's one thing to say that big grand statement. It's another thing to break it out into ways that you as agencies can take and integrate into your work. So the first principle that we like to talk about is about prioritizing and valuing prevention, human health, and improved quality of life. This is about not overlooking health impacts in favor of business interest or cost effectiveness. We want everyone in California, especially in our state government, to be making improving health and well-being of Californians our top priority. The second is do no harm, which seems self-explanatory, but it bears a little bit of discussion that what we're really looking for from agencies is to ensure your actions do not result in increased pollution or worse health outcomes for our communities. The third principle is to prioritize environmental justice communities, both to confront a historical legacy of disinvestment and high pollution, and also to recognize the current state of affairs in our environmental justice communities. Agencies can and should prioritize environmental justice communities as a matter of equity. Next principle, please. Number 4, meaningful community engagement. Communities deserve to have a voice in decisions that will impact them, but experience a lot of barriers to engagement. Proximity to decision-making, language access, broadband access, just to name a few. Agencies should be partnering with local communities to facilitate engagement and also be responsive to the concerns that are raised by communities and transparent in the process you undertake as a result of those concerns, so communities can stay engaged and hold you accountable. The 5th principle is to be proactive. As agencies, you have the privilege of information. You have the privilege of knowing what's going on at a very macro level, and you should not wait for communities to come to you to ask for solutions to a problem. If you see a problem in a community, being proactive about reaching out to them to pursue solutions is a best practice. Next principle, to take an intersectional approach. Environmental justice communities, as Gladys explained, have been disinvested in economically. They suffer the effects of the patriarchy, of systemic racism, of state violence, and really solutions should be looking to address as many of those issues as we can. So we're encouraging you not just to reach out and work with communities, but also to reach out across agencies so your solutions are as intersectional as needed by the communities you're trying to help. The next principle is to be responsive, which again, another one that seems pretty self-explanatory, but to explain that we want agencies not only to respond initially, but also to continue dialogue and follow through on the concerns that are raised through that dialogue until solutions are reached. And finally, science and data are often take a really long time and usually verify what communities have been saying for many years before that data was created. So we ask that you not only ask for community input, but trust what they tell you is truthful and valid data in its own right and worth acting upon, even if the science and data collection is behind what the community is telling you. The next slide will show you an overview of the agencies we've assessed and the scores that they received. This year, we assessed 8 agencies and designated 4 agencies to watch, which isn't a negative designation. It just means that those agencies didn't receive a full assessment this year. Our assessment is focused only on actions taken in 2019, so wouldn't include any prior context or any actions that your agency has taken in the first half of 2020. We further focus on actions that CEJA members and partners have directly engaged in so that they could use that experience to inform the overall assessment and the notes, quite extensive notes that you'll see in the final assessment released later today. So next slide, please. Most agencies assessed in the score improved their scores in 2019, which is something that we really directly attribute to the Newsom administration's commitment to putting people first and building deep relationships in communities. And we appreciate a lot of the efforts that we saw in the Newsom administration's first year. However, with an average C rating, it's still important to note that environmental justice communities in California are still suffering a pretty unacceptable level of pollution and disproportionate health impacts that need to be addressed. Next slide, please. This assessment is not intended to be the end of the conversation, but hopefully a continuation of a conversation that many of us started before today and a conversation we hope to continue long after today. CEJA is ready, along with our member and partner organizations, to answer your questions after this assessment briefing today and to continue working with you this year in our quest to improve your scores for our 2020 assessment. So now we'll take a quick break to do a poll. So you will see a couple of polls come up, and the goal is to see what your interests are. So if you could please fill out this first poll, which is what EJ principle are you most familiar with that you have really prioritized in your work or you have direct experience trying to integrate into your work. And we'll take just a few more seconds to let folks answer. Just 5 more seconds. Okay, let's show the results, please. So overwhelmingly, it looks like a lot of you have worked on meaningful community engagement as well as prioritizing EJ communities, which is really exciting. And we're glad you're sharing that with us today. The next poll will ask the question slightly differently, which is what EJ principle are you the most interested in learning more about? So if we could start the next poll, please. And if you could complete that, we'll give you about 30 seconds or so. This could be something you have questions on or something you're trying to work on integrating into your agency and would like to discuss with some other folks. 5 more seconds. All right, we'll close the poll and show the results. Great, this looks like taking an intersectional approach is first, but that there's broad interest in a lot of the principles we've shared today, which is really exciting. So as Cassie mentioned, after our presentations of case studies and a brief break, we are going to go into breakout sessions based on the principle that you are most interested in learning more about. So if you could please take a moment to rename yourself in Zoom. We'll put a new slide up here. We are asking, and you'll see some of us in CEJA have already done this to model for you, that you put the number of the principle you're most interested in at the front of your name, and please keep your name, gender pronouns, and organization after that. This will help us sort you into the right breakout rooms after we get back from the break. And if you have any questions or concerns about how to do that, please message Tiffany at the help desk. And now I would like to pass the virtual microphone over to Diana Vasquez, CEJA's policy manager. Thank you.
Hi, thank you. Thank you, Katie, for that. So again, good afternoon, everybody, and hello. My name is Diana Vasquez Ballesteros. I'm policy manager for CEJA, based in Sacramento. So it's great to see y'all virtually, at least, and really trying to have this be more of an interactive presentation. So we're now going to actually go into the agency case studies from our CEJA member and partners. They will provide examples of how we can apply the EJ principles and ways state agencies can improve their performances. If any of the any of y'all have any questions, we're going to actually have Katie change her name to the Q&A, so you can actually give Katie your question specifically in the chat. So if you have any questions throughout the presentations, we're going to have a Q&A segment at the end of all the 3 case studies, and then we can actually be able to ask some of those questions. So with that, I will first like to introduce Julian Jordan, who is the Policy Coordinator for Leadership Council for Justice and Accountability, and who's based in Sacramento. Julia will be discussing the Strategic Growth Council and the California Department of Food and Agriculture departments. She works with statewide alliances partners on policy advocacy to ensure participatory and equitable policy and processes for California's more vulnerable communities are seen. Go ahead, Julia. Do you want to take it away?
Yeah, thank you, Diana, and all the CEJA staff who've put this together, and for having me be part of the presentation. As Diana said, I'll be talking a little bit about the Strategic Growth Council, SGC, and also the California Department of Food and Agriculture, CDFA, which were the 2 agencies that we were part of reviewing for the assessment. Just a little bit more, Leadership Council is based in Fresno. For those who don't know, we work with communities in the San Joaquin and Eastern Coachella Valleys. I'm based in Sacramento as the policy coordinator, but we have offices in Bakersfield and Indio in the Eastern Coachella Valley as well. So next slide, just starting with the Strategic Growth Council at SGC. This agency is essentially a committee. It includes a committee made up of several, the heads of several agencies, including CDFA, the EPA, California Transportation Agency, and others. And their mission includes supporting healthy, thriving, and resilient communities. So SGC actually administers several programs that are significant to environmental justice communities and to our organization, including the Transformative Climate Communities, the Affordable Housing and Sustainable Communities, Regional Climate Collaboratives Program, and Technical Assistance Programs. So we've worked with this agency in the past, and they've, similar to last year, performed relatively well for the 2019 agency assessment in terms of environmental justice based on those principles we just went over. And I'm just, wanted to especially, excuse me, highlight the 4th principle around meaningful community engagement. SGC staff and, even some of the council members themselves have worked directly with us, my organization, and CEJA as a whole to try and advance several different issues related to environmental justice through program guidelines and other avenues, working directly with us and with communities. And a lot of this is really just around the approach itself, right? I think Katie mentioned that environmental justice is also about the process. So, we think that SGC views members of the public as collaborators, as, true collaborators in process, and not sort of just something to be incorporated after the fact. They tend to be proactive and respectful and transparent when working with folks to develop and implement programs. And, we've worked with them a lot on the TCC program in particular. Most recently and last year, we were really pushing to include disadvantaged unincorporated communities within that program as an eligible entity to apply. And we've had a lot of kind of open conversations. They've been open to learning and trying to figure this out with us. And we're still in that process of trying to figure it out, even though the program is, at risk of not having any funding. They modified the last guidelines to at least include some of the qualifying unincorporated communities that previously won planning grants to apply. They've consistently, seek feedback and involvement from prior grantees on different kinds of projects, and they've really incorporated into their guidelines, making sure that applicants include community engagement and outreach, even things like anti-displacement measures in their grant proposals. And staff themselves even, they'll travel to parts of the state where they need to be. They do a lot of work directly with potential applicants, current grantees, and communities to improve the implementation of their programs. Next slide. So moving on to the California Department of Food and Ag. So CDFA is a brand new one for the CEJA assessment. This is the first time that we've ever reviewed them. So, we're really, for Leadership Council, specifically looking at this agency primarily for one program they administer. So this is not an overall look at the agency as a whole. But CDFA does, protect and promote agriculture, which is clearly a really big industry in the state. It's an industry that heavily affects the regions that my organization works in, and the residents that we work with are deeply affected by this industry. Unfortunately, the agency did score the lowest on the assessment. And that, like I said, is because our focus was pretty narrow, primarily on the dairy digester program that CDFA administers, which is, has in the past been a pretty large amount of funding from the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. Unfortunately, what we don't see within that program is a central and clear commitment to local communities' health and environmental and climate justice. So this is kind of where we're looking at this EJ principle number 1 around, is this something that prioritizes and values human health and improved quality of life? Unfortunately, we would say no. The dairy digester program, for those who don't know, is it provides funding to develop a certain kind of technology on dairy operations that captures methane to turn it into biogas. And for us, we see this as unfortunately, a false solution that has been overly invested in with the promise of reducing greenhouse gas emissions. But unfortunately, there are huge impacts in terms of implications for water quality, implications for doubling down on a really unsustainable method of dairy farming that relies on compact and concentrated farms that heavily pollute many rural and agricultural communities that we work with. We'd like to really instead see prioritization of human health and quality of life by, rather than favoring the continuation of this sort of unsustainable type of animal agriculture, but really kind of looking at transformative programs that support farmers and ranchers to implement agroecological practices, even beyond, I think, what we see the agency embarking on now. We want to see inclusion of farm workers, a conversation about a just transition in agriculture, moving towards agroecology, and real proactive inclusion of communities of color and immigrant communities beyond farmers as well. So those who are impacted by ag as residents, as workers, and making sure that programs to help farmers are not at the expense of nearby communities. So running out of time here, I just wanted to make one quick note that I also acknowledge the photo here. Last year, the agency did put out a farmer equity, or just recently from work from last year, put out a farmer equity report. We think that's an important first step, which really includes a lot of the things that I think a lot of us knew about some of the issues in agriculture and historical racism, lack of access, and imbalance of power in the agricultural landscape in California. And so we're really looking forward to real, meaningful, and bold action on reckoning with that history and that current racism within the agricultural system, and looking at CDFA to see, you know, some improvement in the future in terms of actually dealing with and reckoning with the injustices that we know are there. So I'll stop there, running out of time. Thank you very much.
No, thank you. Thank you, Julia. And again, for folks, if y'all have any questions for Julia, go ahead and send them to the Q&A, which is Katie, and we'll go ahead and start compiling those questions. And then next, I would like to introduce Ingrid Bostrom, Assistant Director for the Center of Race, Poverty, and the Environment, who is based in Oakland, Embryville area, and who will be discussing the Department of Toxic Substance Control and also the California Geological and Energy Management, for short, Calgem. She leads the policy team for CRPE, which sponsors and supports state legislation to advance environmental justice in the Central Valley and beyond. Welcome, Ingrid. Go ahead, Ingrid.
Great, thank you. And if we can advance to the next slide. So I'll start with the Department of Toxic Substances Control. So this is an agency that has been included in the assessment for quite a number of years. We did see an increase in its overall score this year. Department of Toxic Substances Control protects the public from toxic substances. It has quite a wide purview. And because we are pretty involved in DTSC programs, we covered site mitigation and its hazardous waste programs, which includes enforcement and permitting. We did not assess the Safer Consumer Products program. So I want to start by acknowledging several things that DTSC is doing right and that I think are a good model for other California agencies. So I want to start with DTSC has grown its environmental justice staff over the years, and we've seen it progress from a single staff person who even started quite high up in the organization, but still was a single person. And we've now seen that expand out to a whole Office of Environmental Equity. And so we have seen increasing staff as well as an integration of environmental justice in a lot of program areas rather than a check mark or a low-level employee. And so that is something that I do want to acknowledge. Some other things that we have seen improve over the years is the access and dialogue with leadership and an openness to problem solving and discussion with environmental justice advocates. So I think that's been happening at a lot of agencies. It's certainly happening at DTSC. And I also want to acknowledge DTSC has been in the spotlight for a number of years, not always for the best reasons. And we have seen some progression from a lot of defensiveness, feeling attacked, to really committing to problem solving and more solution oriented conversations. So I think that's been a great thing to see at DTSC. In terms of the principle, we did want to highlight principle number 7 here, which is be responsive. And this is not new, but the structure at DTSC has made it very difficult for impacted communities to have a place to be heard. So we are recommending a board structure to increase transparency and accountability. This will also provide a space for residents to be heard. And so overall, there's a number of areas that we think DTSC can improve, but at the very base, we can improve its structure to one that really provides more access to people that are impacted by DTSC's program areas. And I know that we're running a little late, so I'm gonna jump to the second agency, which is the California Geologic Energy Management, so Calgem. Here we also saw an improvement in the overall score. I think this one did jump up the most. And I think that is reflected a lot in its adoption of a new mission. So the new mission includes protecting public health and the environment. So that was a big and positive change. Some other things that I will like to point out is the public rulemaking, really focusing on public health and safety. This is going to be very important for protecting the health of residents living near oil and gas. And I really did want to call out, even though this is 2020, so please forgive me, CEJA, but I did want to call out for other agencies that might be on this call, the robust public process that Calgem has used in its pre-rulemaking process. We have long criticized a tendency for agencies to, quote, decide, announce, and defend. This is, basically waiting until the very last minute when there's no flexibility truly to guide a rule or a regulation. And it often presupposes an outcome before impacted residents and advocates can weigh in. So we appreciate that Calgem has done an early pre-rulemaking process, which actually generated 40,000 comments, which is unbelievable. In addition, I did want to also appreciate that we saw for the first time that in my career, hearings conducted in Spanish. And so wanted to lift up that, as well as many different ways of submitting comments, recognizing that there are different access issues. In terms of the principle, we wanted to uplift EJ principle number 3, prioritizing EJ communities. Calgem has a lot of room here for growth because of its longstanding emphasis on protecting and promoting oil and gas extraction. There's a legacy, there's a historic legacy here. And a lot of impact to EJ communities. And so just a number of things that would improve in this area is, of course, a 2,500 foot buffer between oil and gas extraction and sensitive receptors such as homes, schools, and hospitals. But there's a couple of other things too, which is prioritizing enforcement in EJ communities, in prioritizing the proper abandonment of idle wells in EJ communities. So there's lots of things that Calgem has a responsibility for, and making sure that we're putting the resources and investing those programs in EJ communities first would go a long way. And I see that I am out of time, and so I will leave it there. Thanks very much.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Ingrid, for that. And friendly reminder, if there's questions for Ingrid on either both DTSC or Calgem, please direct them to our Q&A, which is Katie, and then she's going to be compiling them. Okay, cool. Thank you. So now to our last speaker case study, I would like to introduce Ami Raval, Senior Policy Researcher for the Asian Pacific Environmental Network based in Oakland. She will be discussing the California Energy Commission and also the California Public Utilities Commission. These two agencies didn't receive letter grades in our agency assessment for this year, but we're following and engaging with them and looking if it's something that we're going to be considering for the upcoming years. Through her role at APEN, she offers environmental justice and health equity lens to climate and energy policies in California. So with that, I will have Ami take it away. Go ahead, Ami.
Great, thank you, Deanna, and thanks to the full CEJA team for all the hard work that's gone into organizing this webinar, and excited to be reflecting and sharing some of the historic work that APEN's been doing in the clean energy realm. And as mentioned, APEN, for folks who aren't familiar, we're an environmental justice organization that organizes Asian American immigrant and refugee communities in the Bay Area, namely Richmond and Oakland Chinatown. So I'm going to start with reviewing the California Energy Commission, or the CEC. CEC is the primary energy policy and planning agency for the state. And this agency is leading the state to meet its ambitious climate and energy goals towards 100% clean energy future, or what is commonly referred to as our renewable portfolio standard. And so this includes activities like planning for transportation electrification, advancing energy efficiency standards, and investing in technological innovation in the clean energy space. Overall, in the context of 2019, I'd say that the CEC staff have been incredibly proactive in reaching out and authentically connecting with EJ advocates like myself, really to ensure that our expertise and recommendations are heard and reflected. And so that's why here we're really uplifting EJ principle number 5, being proactive. This includes continued relationship building through the CEC's public advisor, with the chair of the commission, Commissioner Hochschild himself, which is seen here in the photo with myself and APEN and CEJA staff with the chair. And really across the agency, we feel like we've been able to share direct experiences and challenges we faced in CEC's programs and processes, and that there is initiative to address those challenges. In response to our feedback, for example, the CEC released an online platform called Empower Innovation last year, really to facilitate community-based organizations to realize cross-sector partnerships with technical institutions and companies. And they also added environmental justice representatives to several clean energy programs advisory committees. So overall, it's promising to see many of the recommendations we've offered over the years through comments and advocacy being implemented at the CEC. And one program I want to name and uplift that APEN's done a lot of work around is EPIC, which is CEC's premier grant funding program for technology demonstration and deployment projects, a portion of which is actually mandated to be invested in disadvantaged communities. Empower Innovation was really meant, I think, is an opportunity for us to better access EPIC funding. And we have continued to explore funding and grant opportunities through that program as a community-based organization to see if we can secure funding for our communities. I will say that despite the agency's progress, CBOs like APEN, I think, still do face many barriers navigating, applying for, and securing competitive grants like EPIC. And so while there's a lot of work that's been done, I think that there's continued partnership and advancement towards better inclusivity of CBOs in that process that can happen. However, I do think that other agencies can take note of the ways CEC has experimented and innovated and really made structural changes to ensure that its programs are reaching and meaningfully benefiting EJ communities. So that's the CEC. I'll move next to the California Public Utilities Commission, or the CPUC. The CPUC regulates investor-owned electric and natural gas utilities, as well as water, telecommunications, and rail services. CEJA's 2019 assessment really focuses on assessing our work across a set of proceedings, including wildfire mitigation, climate adaptation, long-term procurement and integrated resource planning and resource adequacy, and building decarbonization. So our experience with the PUC in 2019 is that leadership at the Commission has valued and respected community expertise, and that's where we want to highlight EJ Principle number 8 for the PUC. This is really exemplified by its consistent partnership and collaboration with advisory groups like the Disadvantaged Community Advisory Group. In 2019, APEN was an active participant in the climate adaptation proceeding, and our leadership in developing some seminal work, our Mapping Resilience Report, has been amplified and was directly used to inform how the PUC is approaching defining vulnerable populations alongside disadvantaged communities. So in that context, we were also invited to present to the IOUs and other stakeholders on the roles that utilities play in maintaining safe, affordable, reliable, and resilient operations for its customers. And really kind of grounding in our vision for energy resilience that centers people and communities as opposed to just infrastructure and wires and poles. So I would say that for other agencies, I think there is a lot to learn in terms of strengths and challenges from our work in the PUC adaptation proceeding, specifically on how agencies can consider and protect the most impacted communities from climate disasters. And overall, we continue to recommend that the PUC prioritize creating meaningful engagement opportunities across its proceedings. And although we'd like some improvements as demonstrated in the assessment, especially in the IRP proceeding, we have appreciated the steps that the PUC has taken to include our values thus far and the initiative they've taken in other proceedings as well. And I did want to name that the liaison's office in the PUC did communicate with us about this assessment, and that was very much appreciated. And we hope that it's the beginning of a strong relationship with the full CEJA team. And that's it for the PUC.
Oh. No, thank you. Thank you, Ami. And thank you, everybody who spoke, Julia and Ingrid. And with that, we're done with our case study segment. So now we're going to actually go into the Q&A portion of the discussion. So I'm going to go ahead and hand it off to Katie. Katie, do you want to go ahead? And if you also have any questions, still feel free to chat them. If we're not able to answer them, we'll try to definitely get a moment that we can actually sit down with some of the agencies to be able to actually help with those questions. But go ahead, Katie.
Yes. Thank you. You took the words right out of my mouth, Diana. I was going to say we've gotten a few great questions, but we only have time for one, unfortunately, so I'm going to stick to the juiciest one that we've gotten asked the most frequently, which is how has the pandemic affected outreach in environmental justice communities, and what would maybe a couple of your recommendations be for agencies who are looking to do outreach during this really difficult time? And recognizing we're over time, well, if you could keep it to just a minute or so. And I want to start with Julia, since Leadership Council led on a letter on this very topic.
Yeah, thanks, Katie. We have a lot of recommendations, and I will share the current ones that we have right now. We're actually, it's obviously affected our personal, like our organizational work a lot because we're unable to do the normal in-person gatherings we do. Sometimes we're in somebody's home just having a conversation. So that's obviously not able to happen, but we've been playing around with different ways of engaging folks online. We've made phone calls to individuals that we work with, checking in ever since the very beginning of this pandemic. And we're right now, we've seen a lot of, frankly, really disappointing attempts or not so, not non-attempts at engagement on the local level, especially. And so we have a lot of we've put some thought into, since the beginning of the pandemic, how agencies can really use online tools, how they can make sure phone lines are available for folks who can't travel and who it's unsafe to do so, as well as translation and ways to get the word out and make sure people have the right materials and that they're prepared. So I will definitely share that. I can either drop it in the chat, or maybe there's a follow-up email that CEJA could help to share, but we do have a lot of specific recommendations there. And we also have an updated letter and version of those recommendations based on our local experiences actually coming out pretty soon.
Great. Ami or Ingrid, do you have anything you'd like to add briefly to that?
Very, very quickly, I can say, just recognizing that a lot of the residents that we work with in Kern County don't have access to technology. I know it's been said a lot, probably people know that, but making sure that phone access works is really important. And even those that do have technology, there's also reception issue in the Central Valley, or connectivity issue. And also reaching out to advocates like us. We are actively working with our residents to be able to increase their capacity technologically. And so we've started to have community meetings on Zoom, and it is definitely been a learning process for a lot of folks. So outreach to some of the advocates like our groups in CEJA for assistance in any outreach is also I think a full avenue.
I have nothing. I think they covered it great.
Great, thank you. So we are going to take a quick moment to take a group photo / screenshot. So we'll stop sharing our screen. If you wouldn't mind, if you're not on video and are comfortable coming back on video, to come back on for just a moment and to hold your smile for a couple of moments, since there's multiple screens we need to screenshot to get all of your beautiful faces. So if you'd come off on video if you can, and just smile, and 3, 2, and 1, and hold it. Work out those cheek muscles. Okay, I think we're good. So thank you for entertaining us on that. So we're going to take a break. So before you go, if you could, you can feel free to turn off your video, walk around, stretch a little bit. We all are coping with being on video all day. But before you go, if you could please make sure to change your name using the instructions on the screen so we can sort you into the appropriate breakout room. We would really appreciate that. And we will be back at 2 p.m. We're going to drop some links in the chat to our executive summaries in case you want to peruse that a little bit. But yeah, we will see you at 2 p.m. Thank you so much.